Hello, Galaxy. I'm Chris Perillo, and I'm going to start this by saying something very controversial. And no, it's not iOS versus Android. Who's the winner? There is no winner. Okay, just FYI. There's one that's better for you potentially, but that's not what's controversial. The most controversial thing I'm going to say is whatever I just said. What was that? I tripped through the sentence. Is Android Oreo ran very well, much more fluidly as a platform on my Nexus 6P, a device that's a couple years old, compared to iOS 10 and 11 on my iPhone 7 Plus and my iPhone 8 Plus. So I wasn't intending on talking about this right now. In fact, in last night's live stream, if you're not watching the daily live streams, head over to youtube.com/LockerGnome, turn on the notifications. TLDR is happening there, AMA every day. You can ask a question that has nothing to do with what you hear me talking about right now. And that's the other channel, so it's primarily for live videos. I was thinking I'd wait until I got the new Google device that's set to be announced this week. And then I thought, wait, this is a software comparison. I'm talking about the software. And if I can, talk through my experiences with this and tell you that I find Android to run better on older hardware than iOS to run better on newer hardware, I think this is actually a pretty decent example. Keep in mind, though, this is just my experience. Everyone's got different experiences. And if you experienced Android 5 years ago, it's different from what you experienced, even from a year ago. I'm not saying Android Oreo improved everything, but I've always been more of a software purist, and so I've always appreciated what Google's laid out with its Nexus program, with its Pixel program, that pure Android experience. That's what drives me and drives my interest. To me, the hardware is like the platter, and the software is the food on top of the platter. Now, when you get handed the platter, do you admire the platter? Oh, it's a pretty nice platter. But then do you eat the food? The food is the important part of the platter food arrangement. I mean, you eat the food off the platter if you want. It's like eating your apps. That's not how I necessarily eat food off of platters. I mean, maybe. I don't have bread to sop up the gravy, but I'm just saying that the food is the software. I'm more of a software guy. So this is it's simply a software showdown. My raw experiences, and I'm doing this to better inform people because I keep seeing over and over and over again, especially with recent conversations, people suggesting that Android is janky. But I'm sitting here telling you that my experience has been just the opposite of jank for the most part. There has been some jank in Android. It's not gone yet, specifically in older hardware, but it's gotten better. And that is also in comparison to iOS. And I feel that people are, relying on an outdated viewpoint that iOS is best in class for mobile platforms. I will tell you this is another controversial thing that I'm going to throw out there. I don't believe iOS is best in class. I'm not going to argue if the iPhone is best in class in terms of hardware, but in experience outright right now. But the software, iOS is definitely not best in class. I believe that Google Android Oreo is. And that's largely been based on recent experiences, specifically with about my only Android experience that I've had for the past 2 years on the Nexus 6P. I think I said 6P, right? This one. Of course that is. What did you think it was? So that shows you how much I care about the hardware. I just don't. Didn't use this, a great deal, as many of you out there have. You've run it into the ground, and in fact, apparently that can be an issue for Android devices. The silicon could become unglued, and then everything gets hot, and everything slows down. I never had that issue with the 6P outright. Never really had that issue with, what was it, the 5X? Or even the Nexus 4? That was like my first favorite Android device. Remember that? Remember when I dropped the thing on it and the screen shattered in that video? God, what video was that? God, it was so long ago. But to me, there's a myth that Android is laggy and iOS isn't. It's a myth. Myth. Yes? No, it just doesn't work. You got to be a Muppet in order for that to work. I want to just basically knock some sense into the people who say that. I'm not saying that Android isn't laggy, but you also can't say that iOS isn't. They both have issues in a different way, but I feel that Android is now outpacing the performance of its platform on various devices compared to iOS, which isn't on its devices. The iPads and iPhones. And of course, your experiences may be different as well, depending on what you've done and what you see. But I'm just telling you as I see it. And I think this is very eye-opening, potentially, for people who don't realize just how bad it is with iOS. And you don't realize how bad something is until you see how good it is elsewhere. And that's all the more reason why you never want to get trapped into the myopic approach of you live in this camp and this camp alone, and nothing else is better. That's very dangerous, especially when it comes to technology. The only time you want to say, like, this is it, and this is the only best thing, and there's no other best thing than this, and this is never going to get better than this, is if it's Star Wars. That's it. But if it's tech, you can't do that. It's not how technology works. It's how Star Wars works. Being a little facetious. Then there's someone in the comments going, "What's FaceTius?" So it's a spelling joke. It's a grammar nerd joke. I am looking to get the new Google flagship, the new Pixel, as it's set to be released this week. Very excited about that. I want it. I do want it. I want it more than I wanted the iPhone 8 because I knew what was coming down the pike. I had attenuated my expectations that much, but from what I've seen with Android Oreo on the 6P, you'll have to pardon the brief pause. The iPhone 8 Plus, which I'm using right now to record this video, just stopped recording the video for whatever reason. Anyway, as I was saying, I'm not showing you both devices because I'm using one. I'm not joking. It really did happen, legitimately. In fact, I don't know if my white balance is the same as it was before. I'm using the iPhone 8 Plus to record the video, and I've got the 6P right here. So most of my comparisons that I've been, seeing, or that I'm going to be talking through with you, are going to be spoken about, not necessarily demonstrated outright. You've got to see it for yourself. That's the thing. And that's the one thing that I've learned, especially in doing comparisons. Like, some people don't see the problem on either side. So you've got to see it for yourself. You really do. And it's reminiscent of the first iPhone, having never seen anything better than what we had. The first iPhone, the best iPhone ever, showed us something that we never had before. I don't think the same is true with the iPhone 10. They said, well, how can you pass judgment on the iPhone 10? You haven't seen it. I'm like, yeah, I'm a software guy. I can see software at a distance. I'm good. I'm okay. So, you didn't realize how bad it was until you had something better. And that's what I want to convey. There is something better than iOS for certain types of experiences. I don't intend on dropping iOS necessarily. Sometimes I want to drop kick it. But especially when it stops recording a video in the middle of recording a video. I swear, it knows what I'm doing. It knows. It legit knows, which is kind of freaky. So, I'm being FaceTius again. Facetious. Look it up. So, I'm not going to drop iOS, if only to stay, as I've mentioned in comments, a bit more objective. I care about software, not hardware, and to recognize software gains, you need to run it on hardware considered contemporary. I'd rather have one iOS device and one Android device for the time being for balance. But of course, it may grow into 2 Android devices and 3 Android devices. Or I don't know. But I do have these things written down, and I wrote down the notes because I wanted to talk about them. So, knowing that pretty much all I care about is software, and this software showdown, one of the first, stark contrasts that I see between how iOS manages something and how Android Oreo manages something, or just Android versus iOS, notifications. Notifications on iOS are a mess. They have been since 10, so they will be throughout 11. They may get better in 12. We don't know. Nobody knows. All we know is what we've had in the past. And what I can tell you is this. Notifications are an absolute nightmare to manage on current iterations of iOS versus current iterations, which are about development-wise, about as early on as they get on either side. You don't realize how bad iOS notifications are until you see how Android manages notifications, specifically on a basic Android device, a clean Android experience. It's elegant. It's just breathtakingly simple and clean and useful and usable. Oh, it is very difficult to shift between Android notifications and iOS notifications. And it got, like I said, it got worse. iOS 11 is borderline unusable. Notifications, I've been turning off notifications in so many apps because I can't use this. Like, they all get lumped together, and then you press the X, and sometimes the X works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes text overflows over the bubble for the notification because iOS thought it would design notifications that way. I think it was starting in 10, which I think was a step backwards. But then you tap the X, and not only do all the notifications below it for the past X hours disappear, but sometimes the notifications above it clear out too. And then sometimes the notifications above it don't clear out. And then you got like 74 notifications above that X that you can't clear out at the top because there's no X at the top of those notifications on iOS. So you got to swipe through each one. On Android, everything is organized. It's clean, it's simple. Animation doesn't jank on an older device that apparently is not even the best device that Android's ever run on. Certainly not Android Oreo. But it's night and day difference. And I use notifications. When you're faced with the prospect of pain in using a software feature, you have to recognize that software feature is not working for whatever reason. And this is not about saying demonstrably Android is just better. It's just, by and large, a fantastically better experience. I would be shocked if anybody could say otherwise, apart from those in the camp like, no, it's Apple's way or nothing. Okay. I know where you stand. I also know what I see. And as someone who loves organization and cleanliness and being able to use software specifically for what it was designed to do, Android has definitely got it over iOS for notifications. Notification Center is a mess on iOS. And you don't realize how bad it is until you see it on something else. In terms of multitasking, I find that I can get in and out of apps with less jank in Android Oreo than I can with iOS 11 on the iPhone 8 Plus. You've got, of course, the software button, the little square button that's at the bottom of the screen that will effectively allow you to tap, and then you can scroll through. Not a lot of frame drops there, if any, that I ever picked up outright, compared to double tap sometimes, and you kind of mistap, and no, you got double tap. Okay, no, not triple tap. I didn't mean to lock the device. Okay, double tap, swipe, drop frame. Okay, that's what I want. You've got a different layout. Of course, you're going from horizontal layout in iOS versus vertical, so that just comes down to a matter of taste. But the fluidity on the Nexus 6P with Oreo has been fantastic. Moreover, it's much faster to switch between two apps. Like, you ever do that? You're like, I need to go between my web browser and the other app that I'm using. On Android, you just double tap that icon, the task switching icon, the square button. At least I think it's square. Yes, memory served me correctly, I think. Okay. Just making sure, because I went through the whole time mentioning the square, and it wasn't the square. Oops. So it was just faster. You can go right back and forth between those two apps, like boom, boom. It's not as clean as it could be because it jumps you to your home screen first and then into the other app, but it's just like bam, bam, and then you're in the other app, like boom, boom. So in terms of task switching, no doubt about it, like so much faster. And you could argue, well, I double tap and then I tap, and then I double tap and then I tap. And it's like, yeah, but it's not as double tap. Like double tap the square. That's it. Like double tap, then tap. So it takes more time, more effort, more energy, more gesture to do the same thing on iOS. And then plus you're also dealing with frame rate issues on iOS as well. And specifically on newer devices like the iPhone 8 Plus. So yeah, definitely multitasking is handled in a better way on Android at this point. This is not to say that if you overload Android with a ton of things going on that it's not going to bog down and not going to be able to manage things as effectively. I'm talking specifically about just workaday, average. I'm just doing things as I normally do, not taxing the system necessarily. It's a cleaner experience on Android. It's a quicker experience, demonstrably. I can do it in boom, boom versus boom, 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 boom. Easy. See that I didn't even have to show it to you. I just narrated it, and I know some of you are probably just sitting back there going, "Yep, this is what I've been saying. This is exactly what I'm saying." And everybody else is like, "What? That's impossible." Next, I was going to talk about fingerprint sensor. Now, not necessarily the hardware, although that is something to talk about, which is different across the board. So I can't really get into that, though. I do know that it is far more convenient for me to use the front-facing Touch ID sensor versus a back-sided, the rear-facing fingerprint sensor. Although the fingerprint sensor on the Nexus 6P and other Android devices allows you to do this, and you can swipe down your notifications, so you can see your notifications just by swiping down. So you can use that sensor button for something more than just unlocking the phone. But in terms of speed, I found it to be just as fast to unlock the device with a fingerprint on the Nexus 6P as I did unlocking the device with my fingerprint on the iPhone 8 Plus. Just as fast. Maybe in some cases faster, sometimes slower, but just seem to be like negligible in terms of speed, which shocks me. Again, we got a newer device, a newer, allegedly newer Touch ID sensor. It's I think the second iteration of the current version, versus the fingerprint sensor that they're using in the 6P. But in terms of speed, unlocking, found it to be faster or just as fast on Android. In terms of consistency and navigation, so yeah, on Android you got those software buttons typically now. You've got a square at this point, a circle, and then the triangle. The triangle is the back button, which some people who love Android love the back button. They need the back button. I'm not necessarily a back button fan. In fact, in Google Play on Android, probably one of the worst Android apps ever. You'd be surprised. It is, like, in terms of performance, not good. And you'd expect better from Google Play, this being their app store. Like, it's not pretty. Like, you can see so many dropped frames in Google Play. It's bad. But it's got a back button at the top, and then that, of course, the software back button is permanently there. So then you're kind of confused, like, well, how do I go back? Like on iOS, there's no back button. You know, you want to get back to the home screen, you tap the button, you're back to the home screen. Of course, you've got the home button on Android, but on iOS, if you didn't realize, you can swipe to go back like a page inside an app, and I'll do that all the time. Like I'm one level deep and just swipe to go back, swipe to go back. It's easy, it's clean, it's simple, it's wherever it is on the screen. So I think Android could improve by adopting that kind of a gesture, and that's where I feel that there's more consistency with back in iOS than there is with Android. With Android, it's a mixed bag because Android is trying to play to every denominator. Like, well, the user may not have this button, they need that there, and they may not have that button, so they need this here. So, you know, there's an issue specifically with how Google's, tried to mitigate that I don't see as much in iOS. So in terms of consistency and navigation, I do believe that iOS definitely is handling it better than Android. And I swipe back all the time, so it's an issue. Not that I can't use the back button, but man, if I'm up here and I need to go back, I go down here versus just going, you know. So these are the small things that just add up, right? For either one of the platforms or any platform. In terms of app exit to home screen speed, I have found that I can get from point A to point B on my Nexus 6P faster than I can on iOS. iOS almost seems to be slow in trying to keep up with what it is that I want to do. Either I have to wait for an animation or jumping back, and I have reduced motion turned on. You know, software experience is bad when you have to turn on reduced motion on iOS. Not reduced transparency, that increases the amount of fugly, but reduced motion mitigates some of the frame rate inconsistencies with animations on iOS, but it's slower to sometimes do things on iOS than I know I can do on Android Oreo on my Nexus 6P. I can get two things quicker, and it just jumps right away. In fact, there is a feature you can turn on in developer options in Android. It has been for some time that you can, change animation speed, and you can even turn it off like altogether, which is great. Like if you just want to, you can. And so you find one that suits you, a speed that suits you if it's not the default. So there's at least that level of granular control, which I've certainly appreciated. But even with the default animation speed, I find that I'm able to maneuver, multitask inside an operating system within in a better way or faster way on Android. Not being as accustomed to Android as I might be with iOS, is just faster, even on an older device, in terms of my experience compared to a newer, allegedly faster device. That's what I'm saying. Specs, man, they're good for your face, not for your device. Your experience on said device. That I should clarify that. Faster device is typically a better device, but that doesn't speak to experience all the time. Web page scrolling jank. Now I realize this is kind of like, one of those things like, what, Chris, really? Like, yeah, but I need to talk about this. One of the reasons I don't like Google Chrome on the desktop is that it sucks. It drops frames like all the time. Scrolling sucks on Google Chrome. I hate it on OS 10, or not OS 10, Mac OS. It's bad. It's nasty. And I have yet to see any incremental improvement over time. I don't know if Google's ever going to improve that, honestly. As opposed to me, not scratching my ear because it itches in the middle of a video. I will do my best to improve that over time. It's nails on a chalkboard to me when I see that. And so I don't like Google Chrome. It runs okay on the Nexus 6P, not great. Compare that to Safari, specifically on iOS 11, and I think that Safari is definitely optimized for speed. in a way that the other parts of the operating system are not. Very rarely do I see anything less than a smooth experience in scrolling in Safari on iOS, and that's true. It's been a solid experience. I wish the same experience existed on Google. Now you could say, or on Android, I should say, with Google Chrome specifically, you could say, well, you can use a third-party browser. I'm like, I know that's the value of Android. You can use third-party default apps, and like I'll get to that in a bit. But I wish it was just that it just worked. And it was clean, and it was fast, and it was simple. It was as fluid as I've seen the other parts of the operating system be, specifically on older hardware. It's gotten better. It definitely has gotten better, but it's still got a long ways to go. And we're talking just about that Chrome experience versus the Safari experience, specifically on Android versus iOS. In terms of voice control, I like Google Assistant. You can use it on iOS if you want. You should. If you want to have your own test, do that. Like try asking Siri a question. You know, Siri being the sex panther of iOS, 60% of the time it works all the time, and I react to Sex Panther like a lot of people did. Like, what is that horrible? I hate Siri. I really do. I gotta say it. There are very few things I hate, but man, that is just I've been burned one too many times, and I hate basically doing a query and it throwing back something just insipid, and then I post a screenshot to the web, and then some jacking in, he goes, "Well, mine worked okay." I'm like, "Well, I'm not using your device now, am I? Right? This is like I'm not making this up. This is what it did. I don't need to be proven wrong. These are flat facts." So Google has the assistant has improved over time, but it certainly I think has a better foundation with Google than Siri has had with iOS. I just to me a big win is not incorporating Siri in any product, and that's not to say that any other artificial intelligent assistant is amazing. I just have found that Google tends to know what it is that I'm asking outright, or it can at least provide the information that I need in response versus iOS. In fact, there have been times that I'll say, play Christmas in the Stars on YouTube, because that's how I might do it on iOS, and it doesn't know what to do. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't do that. You don't have a subscription. I'm like, but I don't need a subscription to YouTube to play it. So then I'll ask the query again, and then it'll give me a result of video. So like, I ask it the same way, and it responds differently on Siri versus Google, which has been a bit more consistent for me. Maybe you've had some variations, but like I said, just try them side by side. You may run into a wash, right? It's specifically in how it handles something it doesn't understand that I think is the bigger value to that type of assistant. So right now, Google Assistant hasn't upset me to the point that Siri has upset me. I've not been happy with Siri for years. And mind you, I did an interview with the people who made Siri. This is in the channel somewhere long ago. It was acquired by Apple. It was pretty neat back in the day. I really liked it back in the day, but I don't think it's gotten better over time. In terms of the App Store availability, okay, let's get beyond the whole, Apple has all the apps. Well, yeah, in the App Store, sure, but Google Play has got quite a few as well. And I'd say that if you just want to accomplish something, you could probably find the app in both stores. In terms of design, okay, honestly, they're about the same anymore. I mean, I like the Google Play layout more than I do, and it's constantly being iterated, than the new App Store layout, which is more of a magazine-style layout. I don't want to read when I go into the App Store. It's not what I want. I just want to get to the apps, right, and then get on with life, and now they want to suck me into a magazine. I'm like, Apple. I don't need content everywhere, okay? Is this going to compel me to get this app? I don't know. Maybe it will at some point, but right now it's not really for me. I've talked about the performance being really nasty with Google Play on Android, all versions of Android, compared to the App Store. The App Store, I think, is now rivaled performance of Google Play. They both drop frames pretty regularly, either platform. So that's a wash as well. And this has just been my experience by and large. But I know I'm not the only one to say that about Google Play, for sure. I do wonder if anybody else likes the new App Store on iOS. Not me, though. I'm not a fan. All right. In terms of default keyboard and typing speed. So Gboard, or the Google keyboard, constantly being upgraded and updated versus the iOS keyboard. I can type just about as fast and make mistakes and see things corrected, pretty much in real time on both sides. So I can't say the typing speed was seriously impeded in switching back and forth. You have different gestures and features that you can tap and hold and move up and let go to get a special character on the Gboard versus iOS and how it works. So there are different features on both sides, but I think I was happier with the Gboard features compared to the iOS keyboard features. And I do know you can do third-party keyboards. I've hated all of them on iOS, including Gboard. I'm not inclined to use. It just feels tacked on iOS versus more native on Google or Android, specifically the Android Oreo. Full featured, configurable, easy to use. I mean, it's a keyboard. I like it. I like it a lot. A great deal. You can even change the color. I mean, we're talking default keyboard app experiences. Everyone's going to have a different feel for it. But like I said, that's another benefit of iOS, is that you can run a lot of the Google apps on iOS if you so desired. Landscape mode. It's usable on the Android device that I've tried it on with Android Oreo. It's clean, it's efficient, it's simple, it's nice. Versus landscape mode on iOS that still doesn't know what the hell it wants to be. It doesn't ever work well. Like when you're in landscape mode, it's fine. You're in landscape mode. But then as soon as you rotate back, expect a little bit of jank and slop and just weirdness. I just don't know if landscape mode has really been fully baked yet. And I think it's going to get worse. I've seen it get worse over time, or certainly bugs have not been mitigated. People just, either don't see these problems or don't have these problems, but it's been documented well enough in my Twitter feed, that is for sure. Rotating a device, an iOS device, iOS gets confused. I'm like, I don't know what you want. Do you want portrait or landscape? Fine, here's both at the same time. Stop using me. So that's my impersonation of iOS at that point, because it just doesn't know what it wants to do with landscape. But on this device, on the Nexus 6P with Android Oreo, it's been fine. It's been clean, effective. I mean, it works. It's nice. I like it. When I need to use landscape mode, which I don't necessarily use as much as others do, but I don't think a lot of people use landscape mode. But when it's there, I think Google has executed on it in a better way. I think it's baked into the operating system's usability in terms of how the app is accommodated on the screen versus iOS, which kind of has been working backwards. iOS used to just be scaled for certain resolutions and certain screens, and now it's allegedly resolution independent, which allows Apple to do different things. But Android's always kind of been, open to different resolutions, and so I think that it's where Google has matured that code to the point where it is at today, I should say. In terms of dictation and correction, I use dictation all the time, and I find that it responds quicker on the Android device than on iOS. Like when I say responds, if I'm going to dictate a sentence right now and then go on with life, I see the words faster on an Android device than I do on iOS. It's like on the same connection, like over and over again. And I find that I have to make more corrections, especially the faster I speak, and I'm a fast talker. The faster I speak, the more corrections I have to make, unless I enunciate very clearly. That's the only way I can dictate with iOS. I need to go to the store later. And that's the only way I can get iOS to do it, versus being able to just rattle off the words on Android and it catch most of what I'm saying. And yeah, you have to make corrections every once in a while, but it's absolutely maddening with iOS. It's very difficult. I've become very skilled at translating when someone's doing something in dictation. It's pretty obvious on the other end, and it's usually pretty obvious when they're using iOS. Not always. Sometimes it's telling. I use dictation all the time, and I find that Google handles dictation a lot better. It's faster, and it requires fewer corrections. It still does require corrections, but fewer corrections by and large in my experience. Camera app. So they're both pretty full featured, but the thing I like about the default camera app, the Google Photos app, or Google Camera app on the Nexus 6P, is that it remembers my HDR setting, versus on iOS period, it never remembers my HDR setting. I shoot pretty much all my photos if I can in HDR. Like it's just not even a question. I like having that high dynamic range just in case. It's never, to me, really diminished the photo that much that I couldn't address in post. You know, I want all the details in the photo. I always have to toggle it back on in iOS, and I know, you can tell me, oh, there's a setting in iOS that you say remember settings. It doesn't remember HDR. Ask me how I know. It will forget it. Inevitably, it'll forget it. It'll forget it within a minute. Like, you wanted HDR? No. I know better than you. I am the iOS camera app. Trust me. But I don't trust it. I know there's a feature now to make auto HDR enabled, but I don't like that. I want to know HDR is going to fire. I can turn on HDR plus automatically, and it's set it and forget it on Android. I don't even think about it. It's a done deal. I love that. I really appreciate it. It's just having that nice little feature that I just don't have to worry about it ever again. And unfortunately, iOS doesn't always think things all the way through in that way, especially in these smaller, components of an operating system. It speaks to the problem of death by 1,000 cuts. And I'm sure people have had bad experiences with Android too. I'm talking about my experience with this particular version of Android on this particular device versus that particular version of iOS on that particular device, or versions on those devices, I should say. But that's a big deal that I can save that setting, and it just remembers. It knows what I want. In terms of icon consistency, in terms of shapes, this launcher that I'm currently using, the default launcher for the Nexus 6P, whatever it is, because you can change launchers, which I know is a big win. If you want to configure your own launcher, or if you want to really have you sink your teeth into a solid launcher, Nova launcher, a lot of people would recommend it. I don't necessarily use it on the Nexus 6P. I don't feel I need to, but the icons that I have on this device, they're different shapes, which is kind of maddening. I'm like, really? I'm like, why can't they all be the same shape? This launcher doesn't have that feature necessarily that forces them all to be circles or squares with rounded corners or triangles or stars, or I don't know. Not that I would want triangles or stars, but future launchers may have that feature baked in. It's just been my experience, with this particular version. That can be, what I'm saying is, they can be addressed in Android. That cannot necessarily be addressed in iOS. iOS has a far more cohesive icon strategy for its apps. So they're all going to have rounded corners. They're all going to be the same shape. You can't necessarily tweak that. Now, speaking of, I believe that a big boon for iOS could very well be enabling third-party launchers, much like they've enabled third-party keyboards and third-party X, Y, and Z that might modify the system experience for an iOS user. I think a third-party launcher could go a long, long way to helping iOS. I mean, the springboard is just getting long in the tooth. Like, it's just, it's iOS. But see, I don't think Apple's going to change that. And here's why. Because you know an Apple screen when you see it. You don't necessarily know an Android screen when you see it. There's some iOS knockoffs in the Android world. Android can look like anything. So there's no guarantee that you're going to look at a screen that's going to be Android, because you don't know what it's going to look like. Versus iOS, you just know. And for Apple to change that this late in the game, they might. I don't know. I mean, they did the whole thing with the whole gigantic software, the hardware nipple, the black hardware nipple on the iPhone 10, wherever it is on your screen, if you're watching it. Unfortunately, this video with the notch somewhere, I can't reach it if it's up there, but I can touch it. I can touch your nipple over here, your big black nipple on your screen right there. You're going to come back. If you buy a 10, you've got to come back to this particular part of the video. You can't screen cap it, though, because the nipple can't be screen capped. It's hardware that the software has to work around. I'm just poking nipples here. It's the big black nipples. So, yeah, I had to say that. I'd like to see that in iOS. I really would. But Google already has that. So I find that the icon consistency is better on iOS with that launcher. Small detail, but I do notice those things. Performance boosts with updates. So this is something that I need to speak to as well. Having upgraded iOS, every version, every time they come out with a new one, I upgrade the iOS on that phone. I've spoken to how performance has gotten worse. Other people have said the same thing. It's not psychosomatic. It's really just getting not greater. But I have now been running 3 versions of Android on this device, and it has been a better experience every time. Maybe a few new features, but more than anything, I don't feel the device is getting slower. I don't feel that this is slower than it was 2 years ago when I got it. I feel it's just as fast, if not maybe a little faster in spots. Now, whether that's psychosomatic, can't tell you. I mean, like I said, I've only just lightly been using it, but now, coming back to this device 2 years later and doing this comparison and contrasting with iOS, it's seemingly more fluid. And this goes back to everything that I've been saying. Like, if your device gets better with those software updates, those operating system platform updates, I mean, you're getting a better experience for something you've already paid for, versus not, and that's the way we're seeing Apple. We have seen Apple over the past few years, in terms of their eye or lack of eye for detail or quality control. The last thing I have on my little list is something that I know is a little funny to some of you, but I thought this was really striking. It shocked me. I have the Star Wars app. I love the Star Wars app. It's one of my favorite apps of all time. Don't ask what the favorite app is. It's Star Wars. Hello. On iOS, this was the case. It's been the case for a while. It just doesn't run well. It's choppy. It frame drops. I mean, it works. I mean, I can tap something and it functions, but it's always dropping frames and animation and skips. And even when you have everything cached, it skips on iOS. iOS 10 certainly, iOS 11 absolutely, the iPhone 7 Plus, the iPhone 8 Plus, ample hardware. It really surprised me when I tried the Star Wars app on the Nexus 6P with Android Oreo. It's smooth. It is so much smoother. It is like 100% better on the Nexus 6P with Android Oreo than it is compared to iOS on the latest iPhone. It's better. So it's the code, right? So it could be the framework that they're using that's more optimized for Android than it is for iOS. That could very well be the case. I'm just sitting here and reporting to you that, wow, I wonder how many other apps I have that work better on Android than they do on iOS. Specifically on older phones running newer versions of Android compared to newer versions of iOS. I've suggested that we've kind of hit a law of diminishing returns in relation to more bang for your buck with these newer devices from Apple. I believe software performance peaked with the iPhone 6S. The iPhone 6S was probably the last time I ever felt a real speed boost, some kind of tangible speed boost. Maybe between the 6 and the 6S, but the 6 or the 6S was about the last time that I found the hardware to keep up with the software to keep up with the hardware, where they were running in parallel with one another, where you got faster hardware and the software just automatically became better. It just speaks to that. I don't know if we're going to see that what's the word I'm looking for? That cycle change or reverse itself, but that's just where we stand right now. So these are some of the basic things that I just experienced. Like, oh wow, that's kind of different. I got to write that down. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Okay, I got to write that down, because I was kind of going back and forth between the two. Like, could I really get along with an Android device? Like, truly, like the way that I intend to get along with an Android device. My answer to that question is yes. I'm ready. I'm excited for it whenever the next one comes, however the next one comes. I don't know what that's going to be. I don't know when it's going to be. I know why it's going to be. I'm doing this not just for myself, but I'm bringing you along on this journey. I appreciate you joining me. I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it to have this experience benefit you. If you find yourself kind of wondering what the heck is going on, is there something better? And Chris, what do you see? Well, you know what I've seen. You know what I've been saying for all these years, going all the way back. Things change, technology changes, technology evolves. So you can't necessarily hold me to things that I said 5 years ago about the things that I'm saying today, because technology was different 5 years ago. Technology's now evolved. Hardware's evolved. Software's evolved. Services evolved. I'm very intent on doing pixel comparisons. I'm very sad. I really legitimately am sad I did not get one of the first Pixels. I am sad. Probably not going to get one now. The Pixel 2 XL, in my crosshairs for sure. Very excited about that. So thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing with me in terms of a software experience comparison, a showdown. If you are interested in the differences between iOS and Android, specifically from my perspective, and how it handles one thing on one platform and the same thing on another, in an unbiased capacity, meaning it's not absolutely going to be better on iOS because it doesn't work that way on Android, or vice versa, let me know. I'd be curious to address that either potentially in a comment on this video, or potentially in a live TLDR on the other YouTube channel for live long-form videos, youtube.com/LockerGnome. A lot of interactivity over there, Q&A, versus these videos, which is just more of a talking head. And I apologize for my video production or lack thereof, including my chair, if that's been annoying you. That's not my back. Maybe it is. Is that my back? That's Jedi. I know that. I don't know what she said, though. I'm going to get you going. I'm going to get going myself. I got to do the live TLDR now. I love you. I appreciate you. And may the Force be with you. Oh, wait. That wasn't Jedi. That was Wicket.